This is when we go to NFL Films and The Bunker. And we talk to one of our absolute favorites on the River Islands guest line. Joining us live and on YouTube as well is none other than Greg Cosell. Hi, Greg. How we doing today?
Gentlemen, and I use that term very loosely, of course, but it's good to see you guys.
It's great to see you. Hey, can we start with Nick Bosa? I'm not sounding an alarm yet, neither are the Niners, but I think you understand why fans are concerned after multiple ACL surgeries. Now,
sure.
Tendinitis, and so he's missing some time. We're still 4 weeks out, but I wonder if you could answer it this way. What is the trickle-down effect on the 49ers pass rush when he's not there?
Oh, it's huge. He's a top 3 pass rusher in the league. And, you know, it's funny. I've been going back over the last two and a half weeks. I've started to get back into NFL mode, watching a ton of tape from a year ago, a whole bunch of different things just to sort of get myself back into it and keep trying to learn more and more. And so sometimes I see the 49er defense, depending on what I'm looking at, and seeing him early last year in a couple of those games, it's just he's so dominant. I mean, the strength, the power, and the question is, because when it gets to be lower body, and again, we're not doctors, we have no idea. Maybe he'll be totally fine in 3 weeks. We have no idea. But the point is that the lower body is so critical. The core and his lower body is absolutely critical to the way in which he plays. So, you know, any lower body injury that is lingering or causing some discomfort or weakness is obviously going to impact his ability to be who he is.
Is it too simple to say that if Nick Bosa is not at 100%, that it then changes the way that you have to, as Raheem Morris, go about scheming your defense?
Yes, I would say that's fair. I think what you find out first is how offenses are responding. If offenses are still responding as if he's Nick Bosa early on, and unless they find out otherwise, then you don't necessarily have to change up. But if all of a sudden offenses deal with Nick Bosa differently because they see perhaps that he's 75 or 80% of what he was, then you have to decide from a pass rush standpoint how you want to go about doing that. Because at the end of the day, you've got to speed up the quarterback. It's not all about sack numbers. I know fans automatically look at a sack number, but I remember having a great conversation years ago when I did the book with Ron Jaworski and had the opportunity to speak with Dick LeBeau a number of times. And he said, it's not so much the number of sacks, it's can you speed up the quarterback and, you know, make him play faster, both mentally and physically. And that's ultimately what you have to do.
Greg, we talked about this a little bit last week when I think Renardo Green was kind of the centerpiece of the conversation. And you had mentioned some things about how he's a perfect fit and vice versa with Raheem Morris taking over. A lot more has been made of that out here since then. Apparently, a number of defensive backs sound very, very pleased. And it's not necessarily a shot at Saleh, but pleased with what they're experiencing in Raheem Morris's system much more than how they enjoyed last year. Does that wash with you and what you know about the way those two guys deploy their defense?
Well, I mean, obviously, Robert Saleh has been very successful in this league. So, you know, all you can say is this. When Renardo Green, and obviously they drafted him, and we don't know if they drafted him because Robert Saleh had input or not. We don't know the answer to why they drafted him, other than his college tape was very good. But at Florida State, he was predominantly a press man corner, and he was very, very good at it. That's his game. And obviously in the Niners defense under Robert Saleh, there was not a ton of press man. So he had to learn how to play off coverage, had to learn how to play zone. That takes time because when you're playing off coverage zone, you have to have an understanding of route concepts. You have to have an understanding of receiver splits. You have to have an understanding of where the stress points are, where the conflict areas are in zone. When you're playing press man, it's you got that cat and you're playing press man. And that's what he was coming out. So I'm not knocking anybody. Obviously, they thought he was a really good prospect, as I did as well. And I'm sure they thought they could teach him based on their meetings with him how to become a really good zone corner. And he was not a bad player when he played last year. I think he missed some games due to injury, if memory serves me correctly. But his strength is press man.
And he probably will get more chance now with Raheem Morris. I was just looking at the numbers, Greg, and it seems like the Raheem Morris scheme is much more blitz heavy. When his defenses do blitz, What are the nature of these blitzes? Is it corner, safety? Is it a variety? What do you see?
Well, it's funny. I went back, and even though he was not the coordinator a year ago in Atlanta, Jeff Ulbrich was. Obviously, Raheem, being a defensive coach, at his core, understands what they were doing. And one of the things I really noticed in looking at the Falcons defense was how much they blitzed the slot. And it'll be very interesting to see, because I know Upton Stout was deployed as a blitzer at times last year and did that well. But last year, the Falcons really were effective blitzing the slot. They were very effective with what we call overload pressures, where they understood the other team's pass protection and were able to bring an extra player. In other words, you get 3 blockers and you bring 4 to that side, so one of the rushers can't be blocked, and it's usually a second or third level defender. They were very, very good at that. Now, they had a particular player last year in Atlanta. I don't think, and again, it's very early in the process, and I don't know who may or may not fill that role for the Niners, but in Atlanta last year, they had a player named Caden Ellis, who I think is now in New Orleans, but Ellis was kind of a linebacker, DN type player. He could line up on the ball and off the ball, and he was a big factor in their pressure schemes. So again, it depends. If you don't feel you have that player, then you just have different pressure schemes. But I think you'll see more pressure schemes under this group than you did under Robert Saleh.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, with us as he is every Wednesday. Willard and Dibbs, 95.7 The Game. Greg, can I throw Jair Brown into this exact same conversation? He stated just about a week ago, this has been his favorite camp of his career, and openly said, Raheem Morris' system fits me better. So I would love to know what you see in his play.
Yeah.
And if you sort of, again, does that kind of jive with the way you see it?
Well, he's an aggressive player. That's stylistically what he is. He's better closer to the ball than he is on the back end. And when you're closer to the ball, you tend to be able to play more aggressively. So I'm sure he's very excited about this new system, because he'll have more opportunities, to be closer to the ball, closer to the action, and play downhill, and and be more competitive, physically competitive, which is the style of player that he is. He's not truly a back-end player. He's certainly on a post safety. I mean, obviously, most safeties can play on the back end in 2 shell coverages, which he did a good amount, obviously, a year ago. But I'm sure he's much more excited about the fact that he's probably getting an opportunity to be closer to the line of scrimmage and be more aggressive.
You've talked a lot about the big nickel that teams play, and the 49ers did that a lot, where your 5th defensive back is kind of ostensibly almost like a linebacker. Is this something that fits with what Raheem Morris does as far as the scheme that you've seen?
They didn't do much of that in Atlanta. Now, again, that doesn't mean they won't do it here, because they did it, obviously, under Robert Saleh. They did it quite a bit a year ago. So I don't know if that's something that'll be, be in what Raheem Morris wants to do. You have to have the players for it. And you have to look, you want to put out in every situation your best 11. And they're working through that right now. I mean, there's obvious guys who are going to play. We know that. There's, 7 or 8, I'm sure, that are obvious. But then you have a few guys situationally based on, down and distance, based on the personnel the offense has out there. Who do you think your best 11 is in those situations? And I'm sure they're working through that with the final 2 or 3 guys. Could we see it? Sure. Teams have really moved in that direction quite a bit. There's a lot of teams now that play big nickel, and the Niners certainly did a year ago, but now it's a new staff.
Greg, I'm going to start this off really open-ended. What do you think of DeMarcus Robinson as a player?
He's a really interesting guy. I remember when he came out of Florida, and I thought when he came out, he was one of the 5 best receivers in that draft class. And I can't remember all 5, but I just remember really liking him a lot. And he had, I guess, some personal issues which impacted his draft status. And he's one of those guys. There's a bunch of guys in the league like this, guys, who seem to be almost with a different team every year, but wherever they go, they produce. And again, when I say produce, we know he's not going to catch 80 balls for 1,300 yards. But, he's one of those guys that everywhere he goes, he seems to be a factor and a contributor. And he's just been one of those guys throughout his career. He's big. He's physical. When he came out for his first number of years, he ran pretty well. I don't know, he probably doesn't run quite as well now, just as he's gotten older. But He's always been a contributor wherever he's been, and he's been with good coaches and good. So it's not like he's been a contributor on crappy teams where they didn't have anybody else. I mean, he was with the Rams and McVay. I mean, he's always been a factor.
Chiefs, Ravens, Niners, he's been with great organizations. So, Greg, here's why I ask, and I wonder how you.
And I don't know why. Again, I don't know why he keeps moving on.
Right.
That question I can't answer.
Well, and here's the thing: he had a great playoff game in Philadelphia last year. He was probably their best receiver in that game. And with Christian Kirk missing so much of camp, obviously Pearsall out. There's a lot of buzz right now that Purdy and Robinson have this great connection. What do you see as his ceiling in this system?
You're talking about Robinson?
Yeah.
Well, receivers to me are interesting. If you get a lot of snaps, I mean, again, now it comes down to number of snaps. I mean, Robinson's never a guy that's gotten, with maybe few exceptions in his career, he's never been a guy who's gotten 60 snaps on a weekly basis. But if he were to get 60 snaps on a weekly basis and the quarterback's dropping back to throw 35 times, he's probably going to get 8 or 9 targets. And if he does that for a full season, which in an ideal world wouldn't happen with the Niners, but who knows how, things are going to play out with injuries, then you'd have to assume he's going to, catch a good number of balls, particularly in a system like that is not based on vertical speed, which is not what he is at this point in his career. So, could he be a volume target in this? I mean, look, think of Juwan Jennings, who's obviously with Minnesota now. Juwan Jennings became a volume target in the 49ers offense, and he ran a 4.72, and no one would view him as a number 1, which he found out in free agency. And a lot of people didn't even view him as a number 2, which he found out in free agency as well, because he'll be number 3 in Minnesota. So, receivers, it depends on the team and the scheme, whether they're volume targets.
And what does he bring that other receivers in the room don't necessarily have as far as, what is his separation skill compared to Evans and Stribling and the rest?
Well, first of all, he's proven, number 1. And number 2, he's got size and he's got hands. And so he's a physical, competitive player. And those things matter. And I bet because he's been in so many systems, and because wherever he goes, he seems to contribute year 1, my guess is he understands different systems well and picks up what he needs to pick up quickly. Obviously I don't know the man, but you would assume that's the case based on the fact that he's been with teams like the Chiefs and the Rams where systems are not simple. So you have to assume that just from football intelligence perspective, as they like to say, FBI, that he's pretty good at that. That would be my assumption, just based on where he's been and how well he's performed when called upon.
Greg, one of the big wild cards with the 49er offense this year is Deebo Samuel. And I don't know if 49er fans were fully following what happened in Washington last year, but if you follow what's happening in camp, there are a lot of days where they're lining him up at running back and receiver almost 50-50. And so I'm super curious to see how they deploy him. What did you see with him in Washington last year in terms of what's left in the tank and how you think the Niners can use him?
Yeah. That was a somewhat dysfunctional offense a year ago in Washington. It's tough to really draw any strong conclusion from a year ago because Samuel, prior to that with the Niners, as you guys know, was really a chess piece kind of player. I mean, he lined up in the backfield. He lined up at receiver. He was a big pre-snap movement guy, and I'm sure he's going to do all those things again. So when he was in Washington, it wasn't like that. So it's really hard to get a feel. Let's assume that he's, still Deebo in terms of his physical traits, okay? I know he's getting older, but let's assume he's still the same guy. He's going to be a totally different player than what he was a year ago with the Commanders. It almost be like it's a separate guy, and I think, look, we know how much motion, pre-snap movement is part of the Kyle Shanahan offense. And now you have 2 guys in McCaffrey and Deebo who are huge pre-snap movement players.
And guys who you can, pre-snap them into the backfield and move McCaffrey on the line of scrimmage or vice versa. And I wonder, when you look at the tape on both from last year, have they, quote, lost a step, or was McCaffrey's more a byproduct of him not having any room?
Yeah, I always find that hard to answer with running backs, unless a guy, let's say, just starts getting caught from behind all the time. But I didn't think that McCaffrey had a ton of room last year. But then there were games where I watched him and I thought, man, he looked really, really good, on a 4-yard run. He just didn't have it. We talked about Pooney last week about he didn't have as good a year. Brendel's a really interesting player too. I mean, he's been a really solid pro for them, and you can't say that he's not a good player. But, he's also the kind of guy that, he's a little bit of an overachiever. He wins with quickness, efficiency, timing. He's not a size power guy. And, I think at times, he just doesn't move people the way you would ideally like. But don't get me wrong, he's been a good player, but he can struggle at times against power. And I thought last year there was not a lot of room for McCaffrey to run. When all was said and done, it's very easy because of the numbers to look at McCaffrey and say, well, gee, he's lost something. That's easy to say. That's an access to the result, because of the numbers that he only averaged, 3.8 or 3.9, something along those lines, when in the past he's been probably 4 or 5 or above. I'm not sure. I can't answer that definitively. I didn't feel like he did watching him. Sometimes a 4-yard run is a really good run.
Hey, Greg, do you mind for a second if we do the scouting report on you?
Sure, you can go ahead.
Okay, so here's what, my scouting report on you is that there's nobody better in the business in terms of breaking down film and explaining the game. But what can be challenging is to get out of you what you think about things. And we like you, and we want to know what you think. And we know you love basketball. So here's my question for you today. If you could pick any NFL player to run the pick and roll with, just you and him, who would it be?
God, that's... You expect me to pick any NFL player out of nowhere?
Out of nowhere,
I've got my answer, Greg. As soon as he said that and we didn't prep this, the name came right to me. I've got my answer.
You do?
You need a pick, but you also need somebody to roll. So for me, Trent Williams it's great on the pick, but I don't really like the roll.
Wow, an NFL player. God, that's a hard one, guys. How about Myles Garrett?
See, that's who you know what's funny?
I was thinking David Njoku.
Those are both good answers. They're both good answers. Myles Garrett is who came to my mind.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm very worried that you and I thought alike. That scares me to death.
That terrifies me, Greg.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's team up on him, Greg. Let's do it. No, I think he's from an athletic monster sort of a standpoint, he's the flavor of the month. The Rams can't be beat, right, Greg?
Well, until we play the games. But if you look at their roster and the fact that they were in the NFC Championship game a year ago and easily could have won that game, you're assuming that the Rams are going to be really, really good because now they have Garrett, who's, obviously an all-timer and one of the best players of his generation. So, it's hard to sit here now and say the Rams won't be a really good team, but you never know how a season plays out. You just don't.